Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was one of my most anticipated games of 2019, to the point where I pre-ordered it and played it on launch day. The reason I didn't really talk about it back then was because, first of all, I knew that I probably wouldn't give it an accurate critique because I was still kind of in the honeymoon phase with the game. And also because I knew that if I said anything negative, this game was getting praised so heavily that I'd probably come under a lot of fire. So hopefully it's been enough time that some people can listen to me, that you can hear what I have to say about this game without getting completely triggered, because I don't hate this game. I don't think it's a bad game. I had a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of enjoyment to be had with it. And I think that it's a really cool experience. Unfortunately, while a lot of the ideas and the premise and tons of the concepts for the story and gameplay were really solid, a lot of the execution fell a bit flat for me. And I'm going to be explaining why, but first let me give all my positives for what made this game a really unique and enjoyable experience. The first thing that I got to give major respect to is the fact that Respawn released this game in 2019 when we're living in a world where every game is trying to be the next big Ubisoft open world game with the biggest, most diverse characters and the biggest, most diverse world. And, you can create your own character and everything's moving to more of an RPG layout. To release a game that's essentially on the level of Batman Arkham Asylum, where it's linear, where there's not really a lot to do outside of the main story, is pretty impressive. With that said, I will say that even though this linear storytelling allowed us to visit multiple Star Wars worlds, and it really did allow us to experience a pretty unique story, there were times when I wish that this game was a bit more open and that there was a bit more to do, especially because when there was buffer between the main story, when there were missions that were literally return to your ship, I got really bored. There was nothing that killed the story faster than having an explosive, crazy plot point that I needed to see resolved, only for the game to force me to take 20 minutes to navigate back to my ship. It really killed the tone and the pacing for me. On top of that, I felt as though the story was a bit shallow and a bit weak. If you're going to give me a linear game that has only a main story to follow, really, it had better be a really, really good main story. Naughty Dog has done this time and time again with the Uncharted games, with The Last of Us. But this game, while still engaging and interesting and having a lot of unique ideas, really didn't reach that peak of being a great, masterful story, in my opinion. The characters were slightly too shallow for me to really care about them. Again, I think that the voice acting was good. I think that there were a lot of really solid elements, but I just never got 100% invested in these characters' journeys or what they were doing. And especially when the ending of the game seems to kind of undo everything that was set up in the story, and it almost just feels like a giant fetch quest to destroy something, it felt a bit unearned. And while it wasn't bad, it just didn't have the setup required to make it effective, in my opinion. On top of that, the game itself seems to lack an element of polish that you really need for AAA games these days. I mean, just look at the Wookiees. Ew. Now, the game doesn't look horrible, but it doesn't look unlike a game I would have played in the later years of the Xbox 360. I'm not saying that to be mean. I do think that the overall design of the world looks really good, and that doesn't mean it looks bad. I mean, even games from like 2007, like BioShock, still hold up in my opinion. But it didn't ever really push the boundaries of how good graphics could look. And that would have been forgivable, except that the gameplay wasn't really polished either. Look, I love platforming as much as the next guy, but if you're going to do it, please do it right. I love the Prince of Persia games. They're from the early 2000s mostly. Some of them were from the later 2000s. One in 2010, that was actually the last one we got. There was something so refined about the free running in each of those games. There was this cognitive flow to it. It felt polished. And whenever there was a mistake made, I knew it was because I'd pressed a wrong button, I'd timed something wrong. In Jedi Fallen Order, it feels more like the game is cheating me. It feels like I jump at the correct time, but then for whatever reason, there's a glitch that knocks me off the ice slope that I'm supposed to slide down. And rather than me feeling like I need to do better next time, I feel frustrated at the game for cheating me. On top of that, the platforming elements don't feel particularly imaginative. And if you haven't played Prince of Persia or Uncharted, you might not get that criticism. But I'd strongly urge you, go play Prince of Persia. If you don't want a long game, play the shortest one. Go play the Forgotten Sands just for the parkour, and you'll see what I mean. Go play Uncharted, see what I mean. Because I'm telling you, there was something so imaginative about the platforming in those games. They made it so that it was a really unique experience that added to the story. It felt as though it was part of the journey, whereas in Jedi Fallen Order, it kind of felt as though it was designed only to kill time between story missions. My other issue with the platforming was that it was placed in sequences that didn't necessarily feel appropriate. Whereas in the Prince of Persia games or Uncharted, the platforming is used to break into areas, to scale massive buildings, to navigate through, a disintegrating castle, whatever it is. It always seemed to work and flow. With Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, again, the platforming is placed in a lot of times uninteresting story parts. And the only thing to break it up is combat. Now, combat, I do respect in this game for not just trying to copy Arkham. However, again, like everything else, it just feels so shoehorned in a lot of ways. It feels kind of lazy to a degree. Rather than giving us unique enemies to encounter every time we visit a location, it gives us the exact same setup, the exact same number of enemies, the exact same enemies. And if you go to recover health, all those enemies are back exactly as they were, and a lot of it just feels like filler to add to a pretty short game. My other issue with the combat was that it almost felt as though it was discouraging me from using the Force, because you have a Force meter that runs out very quickly, at least on the mode I was playing on, and it takes a long time to recover the Force ability. And while this was a unique idea to keep you using the Force sparingly and to try to find ways to use it when appropriate and to use combos with your lightsaber and to find openings, it was a cool idea. But in the end, it felt as though it was discouraging me from using these abilities that I was playing the game to use. It didn't feel particularly forgiving in any way either. While I do appreciate the challenge that this gameplay brought, and I like the idea of, a Jedi being able to be taken out by a few stormtroopers, it makes the Order 66 in the films feel a lot more realistic. And I did appreciate that challenge. I also felt a bit frustrated that there wasn't really a good way to ever control large crowds of enemies. There's a way to deflect every attack coming. You can deflect gunshots, you can dodge, big gunshots, you can force push rockets back at enemies, you can block incoming attacks, you can evade incoming attacks. The problem is that when all of these attacks are coming at you at once, there is no effective way to block all of them, and that's where the combat can get really frustrating. And like I said, each combat encounter is completely the same. If you ever go back to a location, you can expect the exact same setup that you saw the last time. Now, all of this adds to my biggest issue with the pacing of this game. And it is that rather than having your spaceship find you at the end of a mission or something, you have to return to it. Now, what does this mean? It means that you have to go back and do the exact same platforming, fight the exact same enemies, do everything that you just did for about 20 minutes to go back to your ship. And after having some big, crazy story element that really intrigues me that I want to see resolved, it really takes the energy out of it when I have to spend 20 minutes going back and doing the same thing that I did 20 minutes ago. Honestly, maybe that's why I don't really feel connected to these characters, because anytime we got a really interesting character or subplot, we had to wait like 20 to 30 minutes before we could see it resolved, and sometimes even longer than that. So really the pacing is what kills this game in my opinion, not to mention the bugs and some of the frustrating elements of gameplay that just felt neglected. Now obviously you could argue that everything that I'm saying in this video is a nitpick, and you don't have to agree. You could have loved this game, and that's totally fine. I can see why. There is a lot of merit to this game. And even though I have so many issues with this game and really struggle with a lot of elements, I could see myself revisiting it. There's a lot of fun to be had, and there's a lot of really great mechanics done with the physics and things that you can do with the Force. And I'm glad that they didn't just make you another godlike being that can't be killed like Starkiller. At the end of the day, though, I don't think that this was the godsend Star Wars game that a lot of people praised it as when it initially came out. In fact, a lot of the people who are still the biggest supporters do agree that it is sort of a forgetful game. It's not really something that sticks out in memory because it didn't really do anything memorable in any way. There were so many times during the story of this game that I thought, oh my gosh, we're about to have some amazing moment, and it felt as though they just didn't quite take advantage of some of their setup. Some examples of this are, there's a nightmare scene where you draw your lightsaber at the end and it is a red lightsaber. You're seeing an alternate reality where you become a Sith. And I thought at that moment, oh my gosh, I get to fight myself. This is going to be so cool. That would be cool to play as the Jedi fighting the Sith version of myself. Unfortunately, rather than doing something cool along those lines, they pull you out of the dream and the moment is over. There's a moment where you're running through the halls of a ship during the Order 66 mission. You're watching all the clones turn on the Jedi and kill them and totally storm the area looking for you. And rather than putting this at the beginning where we could really feel some empathy for our character, they place it near the end at a really awkward moment that feels a bit out of place. And again, it's not that the story is bad, it just doesn't feel like they went the extra mile to really tell a good one. Perhaps the most interesting character was the villain here. She was really cool. Having the second sister be the villain, top-notch Respawn. I will give you points for that. And this isn't me trying to hate on the devs or me trying to hate on the game even. I just think that it could have been better. And with that said, I think that this game serves a bigger purpose than my nitpicks. I don't think that this game had to be perfect because what it set up and the possibilities that it opened up are far greater than what this game could ever be. We now live in a world where we could get another Star Wars game like this, except even on the next gen, on the PS5 and Xbox Scarlet, or whatever they're calling it. Oh, Series X, Xbox Series X or whatever. We could get a new Star Wars game that is the definitive Star Wars game. They could look at this game, figure out what works, what doesn't work, craft a really good story, and we could get the definitive Star Wars game. In the end, I don't think that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was the perfect definitive Star Wars game, but I think it opened the possibility for one. And that's ultimately what it needed to do. It needed to create a new legacy within the Star Wars world. And in that, it succeeded. So while I'd probably only give the game about a 7 to a 7.5 out of 10, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. The game is definitely above average and definitely worth checking out, probably on a sale. I think that the future for this series and for Respawn in Star Wars games is very bright, and I think that this game achieved that purpose. And because it was such a ballsy game to release at the time that it was released, and a lot of the ideas and concepts that it introduced, I gotta give it a lot of credit. And I really hope that they can continue to make Star Wars games, because when done right, it's one of my favorite universes to explore. I'm not a mega fan of Star Wars or anything, but again, when done right, I really enjoy exploring that world. So thanks you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below, and we'll see you guys in the next one.